orders to read and there are algorithms to understand. There are policies and procedures that need implementation and updating. There are journals of best practices that need to be read and implemented without some leader having to force them to do it. It is our job and it is our problem. We are educators, and the science of reading and the science of learning should be our foundation for really everything we do.
Let's tackle a common challenge. Students aren't reading. Today, we'll examine smart strategies to spark purposeful reading, rethink instructional design, and set students up for real-world success. Welcome to the Lippincott Spark, Illuminating Nursing Education podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Drees. Join us as we ignite your passion for nursing education and leadership. We'll explore the latest trends, hear from expert nurses, and provide tools to keep you inspired. Let's dive into today's episode and continue your professional development journey together. Hello. In today's episode, we're tackling a common challenge. Students aren't reading. But instead of pointing fingers, we're asking, what can educators do differently? Today, we'll explore how to turn the challenge of students not reading into an opportunity for deeper, more purposeful learning. Joining us today are two outstanding leaders in nursing education, Sarah Stockey and Dr. Virginia "Ginny" Wangren. Sarah's an integration nurse educator at Wolters Kluwer, supporting faculty nationwide in implementing evidence-based teaching. She's dedicated to closing the education to practice gap and strengthening clinical judgment in future nurses. Dr. Virginia Wangren is a seasoned educator and consultant with over 40 years of experience. She launched Iowa State's first nursing program and is widely respected for her leadership in curriculum design and nursing education reform. So let's get started. Welcome, Ginny and Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm so glad to have you here today. So we're going to talk a little bit about this whole notion of students not reading. When I did some research on the topic, I came up with some stats of about 70% of our nursing students don't read the assigned chapters, our textbooks, and citing that they don't have time. There's constraints, there's overload in terms of everything so overwhelming. And frankly, they say it's boring. So what are some factors that contribute to the widespread concern that students today don't read their textbooks?
I'll start. This is Ginny. And one of the things that really intrigued me when I dug in a little bit more to look beyond just my experience and in my solutions, if you will, I saw that the literature addressing the concern that students aren't reading their assignments goes way back decades. It's not new. And I think about when I was a student and, Kelly, given my 40 years of nursing, that was a long time ago, right? But, we didn't read everything then either. We did what is a common concern that goes through the decades. That is, we knew our faculty would deliver the information we needed in a very streamlined and efficient way. And we either back then had to write it all down, or now we just get copies of the PowerPoints. So we bear some responsibility as faculty, and I think also as textbook writers, because we have not created books that meet the need of the learners, and we have not changed how we expect our learners to work with the information over all these decades. So we have to collaborate with our students to make it happen.
And I think another big piece of the reading controversy that you hear kind of everywhere, and there isn't any faculty I've ever talked to that say their students magically read all of their own accord. I think one of the big things that sticks out, and I hear this over and over right now, is that we listen and we don't judge, but often as faculty, we judge. We judge why our students aren't reading instead of actually digging in and using our nursing skills to assess why they're not reading. We like to believe the myths, the things like they don't like it, it's too much time, things that they don't know how to read. My favorite are the faculty who say, it's not my job. They should have learned this before. They can't learn. I hear a lot of faculty give me the excuse of English is their second language, so they're going to struggle with reading. These are myths, and we hear these faculty use these, and it's almost like a cop-out instead of a, hey, our students are going to become nurses where they need to read, right? Reading is part of our job. And so another big thing, and like Ginny said, like the idea that we read a textbook from beginning to end is not accurate. We read with that kind of just in time learning, right? We go in and we dive into something we struggled with. The same way we read, right? If I don't read an article just because I want to read an article, I read an article because it intrigues me. The topic intrigues me. And so kind of getting into that mindset of really assessing why is it our students aren't reading? Sometimes it's I call it the parent guilt. I have kids, I have jobs, I don't have time. And helping the students to realize how to do purposeful reading is a huge part because they just don't know.
Do you think there's any like generational or digital age influences that have changed how students engage with reading? Because this is, it's kind of a new day right now.
Absolutely. That's probably where we've seen the greatest difference between students of several decades ago and now. They are brought up reading small amounts of information at a time, but also reading very efficiently, right? They read for what they need to go to the next minute. And so we have built redundancy into our textbooks when what they're looking for is efficiency and value in the time they spend reading. So there's a disconnect there that can be dealt with, but we need to think about how.
It's not so much even the generational, it's the what they've been raised on. We've been raised on a phone that when I wanted something, I could get it, right? There's not one student really that hasn't been around internet and the ability. We come from our age that wasn't available, or our computers were hooked up to dial tone, and we had to pay per minute. Now it's unlimited of what they can find, and it's that real time access, and that's what they're looking for, right? But the other big thing that I see that's struggling is the intrinsic motivation. We see a lot of that where that student is like, I'm paying for this degree, and so you teach it to me. You give me the information. So they don't even know how they learn, or they don't know how that intrinsic motivation piece works. And so really empowering that is a big part of what we need to do as well.
It is interesting. I had asked my daughter, did you read all your textbooks as I was kind of prepping for this podcast? And she said, I spent over $1,000 in textbooks. And honestly, it was the short snippets that you had just mentioned that she needed to look at, what are those bullets? Not all the, as she called them, filler words, but can I access some YouTube videos or lecture slides or study guides, apps, even podcasts, right? Is there any information on this topic? And it's interesting, how people learn for sure. So we know reading a textbook, right, isn't like reading a novel. It's never been successful. So what are other misconceptions students have about textbook reading, and, how can we help them see that this is an actual tool that will build clinical judgment, clinical reasoning and professional growth?
I think for this, it's as faculty, we need to be experts in how do students learn and how do they engage in their resources, right? And so a lot of times we tell our students, go do it, go look it up, which ends up being extremely dismissive because they don't know how to look it up. They don't even know what they're going to look up. Another big thing I see a lot of is faculty answering the question for the student. So they are becoming the human resource instead of being the guide or the coach to get that student into their resources. I hear faculty say it, they're like, but what if I don't know the answer? I tell them often, you shouldn't know the answer, because if you know the answer, it's not helping your student. You need to help your student find the answer. And so building that curiosity in your class and then praising that curiosity is a big part of how we get our students to start using the resources the way they were made to be used.
The other thing is that we have to, if you will, sort of bring them into the value of intentional use of your textbook. And we do that through the way we design our pre-class, in-class, and post-class lesson plans. So we need to build our lesson plans in a way that not just lays out, this is what we're going to talk about, this is how you'll prove it, whatever, but rather, these are how we will use your resources. And I do not like to call a textbook even a textbook. It's one of their resources. And we're going to target very specific places in that resource. And then that target will be used in class to really maximize your understanding and learning and discussion. And if I prove honest with the student and helpful by saying, this is exactly what I need you to do, they come to class, that actually helped them engage in class and understand. And then I follow up later to validate with them. I've started to develop that, right? And we need to do that from day one all the way through graduation.
Are there any other like low effort or high impact ways instructors can integrate these readings into lesson plans, without overwhelming the students? Because admittedly, you start nursing school, you get these textbooks that are, 3-4 inches thick, it seems, and you don't know where to start. What's essential? What's non-essential? Where do I begin? Do I read the bullet points? Do I read the end of the chapter first? How would you guide them? And also, how can we model effective reading strategy during that class time?
I think the first thing to do is remember we have to start at the beginning with our students and not assume that they've learned anything in their prereq classes, right? So we start with teaching them how to use a textbook and how to get the most from a limited amount of reading. And then we have to give them limited amounts of reading. But I really liked one of the things that I actually did well many years ago. You look back and you think, that was a brilliant decision. At the time, I didn't know it. But we created a How to Learn in Nursing course when we redid our curriculum about 25 years ago. It completely changed the trajectory of our success and of our students. And one thing we did was we engaged experts who were not nurse educators, but learning experts, right? From our learning center, as well as guest speakers I brought in to work with the faculty so that we could help students take control of their own learning. What we have to do is start at the very beginning. You can't change their way of approaching midway through, right? You can't change the direction of the stream. So you have to start early and really completely change how they have approached learning, most likely, as you go forward. And then use some of the strategies I've seen Sarah use, which are engaging and exciting and make it fun to do.
Yes, do tell, Sarah.
A couple big things with reading is I love the way Ginny talks about them as resources because I do the same thing. I call them CSI tools. I don't want it to be a crime scene. Someday when they make an error, I want them to be client safety investigators. So I call CSI client safety investigation tools. And so those are your tools. They should be open every class. Your textbooks, any resources that are in your syllabus should be open in class because it's fair game to dive into and getting them to get used to diving in and coaching them in. I often think of our classroom like a gym. If at the gym, I'm the personal trainer and I tell you to go work out on that machine, you're going to get to that machine and you're going to get frustrated. You're going to walk away. You're going to try things that are too hard for you. You're not going to know how to bite size it in. And so really thinking of ourselves as that coach, that personal trainer to get our students utilizing their things, like Ginny said, from the beginning on. A couple of things that I've done, like with my reading lists, is I still use chapters only. I don't use page numbers because that would require me to update that every semester as the pages update. But I do chapters, but then I use my EPSLOs and my course outcomes to make 4 questions. And those 4 questions I copy to every chapter. And then I just change the type of patient they're using or taking care of. So for like chapter 25, if it's mobility, I use professionalism, teamwork and communication, collaboration as my questions. So when they're reading their book, they're already applying to the bedside, which sticks, right? And if they're like, I don't know what a professional nurse needs to do for a patient with mobility issues, then they know they have to dive into that textbook to figure those things out. But it gives them some guidance. Our students have never been nurses before. We're the bridge between the classroom and bedside. Mm-hmm. And so we have to help them to engage in that reading a little bit. Another thing that I know Ginny just talked about is making things more bite-size. We're in our classroom doing more activities during class where they're reading one paragraph and pulling out the top 3 cues, priorities, and concerns, or what are your top 3 assessment things you're going to have to do for this patient. Doing bite-sized activities with small readings in class so they realize it's not as scary as you thought it was. It's going to take some practice.
When we look at that instructional design, and you both had touched on it a little bit, have you come across any tools or technologies that you've found helpful in promoting strategic reading? Have you seen students using that, allows them to really delve into the information and hopefully retain it, right?
When I see those students who we know as we often call the highly motivated students, ones who come prepared, have lots of questions, those kinds of things, they are students who have learned how to kind of dig in ahead of time and do exactly what Sarah's talking about. They look at the chapter, but from the perspective of the outline for that day, those kinds of things. And they often will use one of a couple of techniques. Some of them do mind mapping. So they start kind of mind mapping the chapter on a single piece of paper with keywords, maybe page numbers or something like that. Others are more visual in terms of they like to kind of draw images and things like that. Others combine it. So kind of some sort of mapping, if you will, I think is one of the most successful things I see. And then what they do is they kind of highlight or yellow or red those things that they're not sure about or that they have questions about. And then, of course, they come to class and they're the ones raising their hand a lot, right? And you love them because they bring up those challenging, like, well, help me understand why this is true. But the other students haven't done that. So they're a little bit 3 questions back already, trying to figure it out.
I think, too, the idea of an ebook, so many times faculty kind of steer away from wanting to go to ebooks because we're like, we know what we know and we love the feel of pages. But the value an ebook brings to be able to read in their language for those students who have a second English isn't their primary language. The ability to bookmark and to add note cards for things that I struggled with on this page so I can come back to it. The ability to highlight in different colors. Like I have students do it with like nursing process or the different parts of the clinical judgment measurement model. Just that ability to see that and kind of pull all those pieces together. I love that students can listen to their audiobook on their way to class, helping students bite-size reading. And so they don't feel like it's this big project of, well, I'll have time for that after my kids go to bed tonight. And after I do all the laundry and after I do all this, I'll have time to read. And it's like, no, put it on while you're doing laundry. Put it on your Bluetooth. It reads aloud to you. Put it in your car. How long's your car drive or ride to class? And they're like, an hour. I'm like, you could have listened to the whole chapter and you would have been ready for class today. But teaching them how to put the hammer into their hands, right? How to use that tool effectively. The other big things that having like what Jenny had talked about with templates are huge. That art of handwriting, what your aha moments are, utilizing resources, things like our Lippincott advisor, right? Being able that real-time resource using the notebook, the idea of a laundry list, what is it you don't know? Bring that to class and then we can work through those struggles. And knowing that class is going to be data-driven will be huge too. Knowing that if you came prepared, I can help you where you struggled.
We hear faculty say that they can notice, you touched on it, as students are reading, they're participating in class more, you see increase in critical thinking skills. And, I had also read an article that students who consistently read past the NCLEX on the first try, about 20% higher first-time pass rates. There's a correlation there between that and reading, which I thought was fascinating. So there's this whole notion that faculty say that there's not enough time, right? There's not enough time in the class to feed, quote, air quote, right, students all the necessary information. So how do they balance this with the need for reading? Because, you have limited time and you do have a lot of topics to cover and concept and such. So I don't know if either one of you have maybe some solution for that or a tip.
That's exactly why they need to do things differently.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
If we don't let students believe we are going to hand them everything they need to know, then we use the time we have with them to deal with those sticky issues, those tougher to understand. So we have to provide guidance outside of class that lets them work with the information that's easier to grasp, that's review, that's follow up, and use the class time for those difficult things. So it takes faculty out of that traditional role that they're so comfortable with. They have to think differently about what they're doing and be willing to have some flexibility in class. So I give you guided reading with some work to do before class that's very specific about what we need to accomplish. As we start working through that, I find that students are really struggling with section B. I thought that would be easy. I have to take time then, go with B, and then figure out how C is still going to count. And it may turn out that was pretty easy for them. Or we run out of time. So what do? Then I do about a 10-minute video to just give them a little more guidance about C. That's post-class assignment, and they have to reflect on that in the discussion. So that means that I'm kind of like the coach. I have to change the game plan mid-game if necessary. And not all faculty are comfortable doing that. So they have to develop their skills of being able to read what's going on and change strategies, directions, priorities, and also understand it's not just what happens in the classroom, but it's how you prepare them for it and how you follow up with them after.
And I think too, a lot of times, and they are, just like Jenny said, they are absolutely right. They're not going to have time to continue doing what they've been doing. But a lot of times as faculty, we've made ourselves a role that shouldn't be existing. We've made ourselves the parrot, like I'm going to read, I'm going to digest, and I'm going to give you what I think is important. The problem is our students never became a thinker. They never became a person to read and evaluate and pull out the key parts. And then we expect them to go be nurses and read an EHR and pull out the important parts. And then we get mad that they can't. Well, we didn't coach them right? We didn't engage them. So in our class, just like what Ginny said, is not to cover the content. Our students were assigned the content to cover. And during class, I engaged them where they struggled in that content. And then after class, I asked them to do something where they struggled the most. And so that they're hitting that part that they struggled 3 times, right? Our blueprint of our program, again, I see a lot of faculty go, well, there's 50 chapters in the book. I need to assign all 50. No, you don't. You use your EPSLOs, you use your topic grid that your curriculum has built to tell you what you're expected to help your students to become. And that's the chapters you choose. You don't need to do the whole book. I actually just worked with a faculty who took all the objectives from the beginning of the chapters and made those their unit objectives. And they didn't align with their EPSLOs. They didn't align with their course outcomes. And it's a lot of that misnomer of what should we be doing as educators versus what is being done and what is being handed to us. So I think that's a big part too, is that leadership, having faculty coaches to help them transition from the old classroom to that new integrated active classroom as well.
Regarding student feedback, have you gathered student feedback on reading assignments? And if so, what insights have you seen kind of emerge? Obviously, we have our end of class evals and such, and the program evals, but have you ever targeted and gathered that student feedback on reading assignments specifically?
I do it at the beginning of the semester. I ask them what they did in their previous semesters, what they've done up until this point, and I ask them why. I'm analyzing and I'm assessing, right? I'm using nursing process on my students because I want to see what I have to target. I want to see what, things I need to transition. The other thing is I need to make them hungry for that book. And if I'm giving them and feeding them, they aren't going to be hungry for that book. So I get a lot of that motivation from making them that intrinsic of, where are you going to find that? Let's dig in, and praising what you prize after that, giving them those rewards like candy and high fives for really diving in and doing that work that you found because you did that assessment on those students.
So if you were to wave your magic wand here, ready? Let's dream big in nursing education. What does a future look like where students are empowered, not burdened by reading, but really empowered?
I think books as we know them today would be very, very different. I think it would be more like having a menu of options for a particular topic. I'll even say objective. And I think about one thing that I used to do when I built my content in the LMS for my learners. I did not give them just one way to learn what we were going to talk about that day. I had reading pages in there. Sorry, Sarah. But often I would include a video that was good that I found on YouTube or some other resource, or that was from my publisher. I might include sometimes 2 videos, one that is more of a kind of a lecture. The other one would be more that kind of sketchy, cartoony kind of thing. What I tried to do is engage them in multiple ways of learning and knowing. And I think if instead of an either or, if our tools using the technology we have available today, that's getting more and more finessed and developed, if instead they dug in and picked and chose and then had frequent learning checks, if you will, let's check in and see how you did on that video. Let's apply that to something. So almost an interactive guided learning experience. I mean, to me, that would be our future classroom. Very individualized, immersive menu of opportunities to address your learning.
Yeah. And I think for me, What does it look like? It looks like healthcare with better patient outcomes. I mean, that's why I became an educator, right? A nurse is engaged at the bedside, not waiting for something to tell them what to do. They're driving. They're like, this patient has this. I'm going to dive into the resources. I'm going to figure out what I can do to make this patient better, not waiting for sitting back and letting other people drive it. That they learn information that you hear from third semester faculty that, boy, goodness, they retained everything from first semester.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of third and fourth semester faculty out there going, yes, please. It looks like faculty that are inspired. They want to coach and they want to interact with their students. They love coming to work on Monday. They aren't dreading it, where they're like, oh, I have 175 slides to go. We don't want to do that. We want to interact. We want students that are driven and motivated, that become nurses that are driven and motivated. And an ultimate winner is our patients. So I think that's my big future.
Is there anything you would do if you could change one thing about how reading is approached in nursing education? What would it be? We just envisioned a future. So would you change anything now if you could? If you were in the classroom right now, you walk in Monday morning, what would that look like?
I think for me, and I'm well known as a challenger, so everybody, I call them your amygdalas. I'm going to challenge you a little bit right now. Stop saying it isn't my job or it isn't my problem. It is all of our problems, because after they leave us, there are charts to read, there are orders to read, and there are algorithms to understand. There are policies and procedures that need implementation and updating. There are journals of best practices that need to be read and implemented without some leader having to force them to do it. It is our job and it is our problem. We are educators, and the science of reading and the science of learning should be our foundation for really everything we do.
I guess, it's such a great question, Kelly. My dream classroom for a long time has been that our learning space is a single learning space, and we can do anything in that space any day. So it's not the didactic classroom or the lab or the sim, but rather that we can immerse these around. And I would get rid of these long class sessions where we have them for 3 or 4 hours and we just exhaust them. And nobody can learn if you've just been doing the same thing for 3 hours in a row. They need time to take a break, to kind of digest what they've just done. So I would completely change how we even organize our week so that we could have little chunks spread out, that we can throughout the day go between these and keep people more energized and excited, rather than this like, oh my gosh, when is this class going to be over?
Exactly. And sometimes finding a buddy, having experience working with and the joy of working with the two of you, being able to bounce ideas off each other, right? I'm presenting this in class. Do you have any ideas on how I might bring it alive, right? And really working with your colleagues to find ways to use those active learning strategies and such. So as we close this podcast episode, what is one spark, right? One spark or pearl of wisdom you hope listeners walk away with after hearing this episode?
Kelly, you asked me to think about this, and I did actually. But it really goes back to, in my mind, what has always kind of driven me to be excited about learning, and that's we're guiding students. What I want to do is really be able to take them through a journey where they learn how to access the right information, but also how to interpret it, work with it, ask some good questions, and then apply it. I want to be able to have a great discussion and then go immediately to the bedside and then let's play with this. Let's do something and let's talk about the what ifs. I would like to be so engaged with my learners together. We're having so much fun that we forgot to look at the clock and, oh my gosh, it's time to go. That's what I want. I want learning to be so fun that we just can't quit.
And I think for me, I think of purposeful reading with kind of 5 key points. 1, we must model the behavior. We have to walk the talk. We have to talk about us reading, show the students that we're reading. The next thing, we must engage students in taking action by having them read. We have to coach them in. The only way to learn is to do. We need to keep them motivated until that intrinsic spark ignites. We need to praise that effort. And we need to hold them accountable if they're not. And that's a hard one for us as faculty. We tend to enable. And then the last one is we need to connect everything that they do and their complaints about, I don't want to read, whatever. We need to tie it to bedside. We need to let them see reading's not going away just because it makes you uncomfortable, but I'm going to help you make it comfortable, right? Get you comfortable in the uncomfortable. I think those are kind of the 5 big things for reading.
Well, ladies, that is a wrap on this episode of Lippincott Spark, Illuminating Nursing Education. A big thank you to both of you for sharing your insights on how, transforming how we approach reading in nursing education. And, for our listeners, just remembering when we guide students to read with purpose, we're not just improving test scores, right? We're shaping future nurses who think critically and practice safely. Thank you for joining the Lippincott Spark, Illuminating Nursing Education podcast. Enjoy this episode, subscribe, share, and leave us a 5-star review. For more information, click on the link below to learn more about Lippincott Nursing products and services. Until next time, keep leading, learning, and making a difference in nursing education.